Welcome back, everyone. Today we will be reading Chapter 11, so let's get into it. Chapter 11. Anderson disembarked on Elysium with the 300 other passengers who had booked a seat on the public transport shuttle from the Citadel. The landing port teemed with people. The densely packed crowd was a mix of every known species in the galaxy, some arriving, some leaving, most waiting in the long, winding lines to clear customs and border stations. Security had always been tight on Elysium. Well, the power might go out. But with the attack on the nearby Sidon base, things had been elevated to a level Anderson had never seen before. Not that he disapproved. Ideally located near the nexus of several primary and secondary relays, Elysium was a major hub for travel and commerce that the Alliance could not afford to expose to possible terrorist attacks. The colony was only 5 years old, but already it was one of the busiest trade ports in the Verge. The population had exploded, recently passing 1 million, if you included all the various and varied resident aliens who accustomed for nearly half the total inhabitants. Unfortunately, that also meant a disproportionately high number of visitors to Elysium were non-human, and subject to heightened screening procedures. The extra security made arrivals and departures a long and cumbersome experience for most travelers. Even humans were subjected to major delays. The staff taken away to help process the alien visitors meant fewer people left behind to deal with the Alliance citizens. Fortunately for Anderson, his military ID gave him the luxury of bypassing the long lines. The guard at the Alliance station scanned his thumbprint and studied his identification for a few seconds before saluting and waving him through. Officially, Anderson wasn't there in any authorized capacity. He was just an Alliance Marine taking shore leave, a believable enough cover story to avoid drawing any unwanted attention and hide the true purpose of his visit. John Grissom was Kaylee Saunders' father. It was pretty obvious they were estranged, but there was still a good chance. Grissom knew something that could help Anderson's investigation. Sidon was only a few hours away from Elysium. There were records of Saunders booking a passage here when she went UA. And even though it looked like Grissom hadn't communicated with his daughter in at least 10 years, it was public knowledge that the Alliance's most recognizable soldier had taken early retirement and become a recluse on humanity's largest colony in the Verge. Anderson still couldn't wrap his head around the idea that Sanders was a traitor. The pieces just didn't add up. But he knew she was involved somehow. Her sudden disappearance had to be more than coincidence. Maybe she had gotten in over her head and panicked when things got out of control. He could imagine her arriving on Elysium, scared, alone, not knowing who to trust. Estranged or not, her father was the most likely person she'd turn to for help. After checking his gear at the hotel, Anderson rented a car and drove out to the isolated estates on the outskirts of the city. It took him a while to find Grissom's house. The addresses in the area were so inconspicuous as to be almost hidden. It was obvious the people who lived out here valued their privacy. Exiting the vehicle, he began the long walk across the grounds of the estate toward the surprisingly small domicile, located as far back from the road as possible. Anderson didn't understand Grissom's desire to withdraw from the public eye. He respected the man and his reputation, but he couldn't imagine any way to justify simply walking away like he did. The soldier didn't turn his back on the Alliance like that. "You're not here to pass judgment," he reminded himself as he reached the door. He rang the bell and waited, involuntarily standing at attention. "You're just here to find Kaylee Saunders." It took several minutes before he heard someone coming on the other side, grumbling as he approached. A moment later, the door opened, revealing Rear Admiral John Grissom in all his glory. The salute Anderson had been on the verge of snapping off by way of greeting died at his hip. The man before him wore nothing but a tattered housecoat and dirty boxers. His hair was long and uncombed, and his face was partially hidden behind a 3-day stubble of gray and black hairs. His eyes were hard and bitter, and his face seemed frozen in a scowl. "What do you want?" he demanded. "Sir," Anderson replied, "my name is Lieutenant Commander David and—" Grissom cut him off. "I know who you are. We met back at Arcturus." "That's right, sir," Anderson acknowledged, feeling a faint surge of pride at being recognized. "Before the First Contact War. I'm surprised you remember me. I'm retired, not senile." Despite the joke, there was nothing humorous in Grissom's tone. There was an awkward pause as Anderson tried to reconcile his memories of the iconic figure of Grissom's past with the disheveled grouch now standing in front of him. It was Grissom who filled the silence. "Look, kid, I'm retired, so go back and tell the brass that I'm not going to do any interviews or speeches or appearances just because one of our military bases got attacked. I'm done with that crap." Anderson pounced, convinced the other man had already slipped up. "How do you know Sidon was attacked?" Grissom glared at him like he was a fool. "It's all over the damn news vids." "That's not why I'm here," Anderson said, trying to hide his embarrassment. "Can we talk inside?" "No." "Please, sir. It's a matter I'd rather not discuss out here in public." Grissom held his ground, blocking the door so Anderson couldn't enter. The lieutenant realized tact and diplomacy weren't going to be any use here. Time to be blunt. "Tell me about Kaylee Saunders, sir." "Who?" The old man was good. Anderson had been hoping to see some reaction at the name of his long-lost daughter, his only flesh and blood, but Grissom hadn't even flinched. "Kaylee Saunders," Anderson repeated, his voice becoming noticeably louder. It was unlikely anyone would hear him. The neighbors were too far away, but he had to do something to get inside that door. "Your daughter. The soldier who went UA from Sidon mere hours before it was attacked. The woman we're looking at as a traitor to the Alliance." Grissom's scowl became a grimace of pure hatred. "Shut up and get your ass in here," he muttered, stepping aside. Once inside, Anderson followed his reluctant host into the small living room. Grissom settled into one of the 3 padded chairs, but the lieutenant remained standing, waiting for an invitation to do the same. After several seconds, he realized the invitation wasn't forthcoming, and he took a seat on his own. "How'd you know about Kaylee?" Grissom finally asked, speaking as casually as if they were discussing the weather. "There are no secrets in this day and age," Anderson replied. "We know she was last seen here on Elysium. I need to know if she came to talk to you." "I haven't spoken to my daughter since before she was a teenager," Grissom replied. "Her mother didn't think much of me as a husband or a father, and I couldn't really argue with her. I figured the best thing was to just get out of their lives." "Hey," Grissom suddenly recalled. "Last time we met, you said you were engaged. A girl waiting for you back on Earth, right? You must be married by now. Congratulations." He was trying to throw Anderson off balance. Grissom knew damn well how hard it was for an Alliance soldier to make a marriage work. His innocent question was meant to rattle his guest. He may have looked like a harmless, burned-out old man, but there was still plenty of fight left in him. Anderson wasn't about to rise to the bait. "Sir, I need your help. Your daughter is suspected of being a traitor to the Alliance. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "Why should I?" he shot back. "I barely know her." "I find out you two were related. Eventually somebody else is going to make that connection, too." "What, you think I'm worried about my reputation?" he scoffed. "You think I'm going to help you because I don't want people to know the great Admiral Grissom had an illegitimate daughter who's accused of treason? Ha! You're the ones who care about crap like that. I really couldn't give a damn." "It's not what I meant, sir," Anderson replied. refusing to be provoked. I tracked Kaylee here. To you. That means someone else can track her here, too. I came to you because I want to help your daughter. But the next person who comes after her, and we both know there will be others, might be looking to harm her. Grissom leaned forward, slowly, and placed his head in his hands, considering Anderson's words. Several long moments went by before he sat up straight again. His eyes were moist with tears. "She's not a traitor," he whispered. "She didn't have anything to do with this." "I believe you, sir," Anderson said, his voice sincere and sympathetic. "But not many others will. That's why I need to find her, before something happens to her." Grissom didn't say anything, but simply sat there chewing on his lower lip. "I won't let anything bad happen to her," Anderson reassured him. "I give you my word on it." "She came here," Grissom finally admitted, taking a deep breath. "She said she was in trouble. Something to do with Sidon. I didn't ask her any of the details. I guess I was afraid of what she might tell me." He leaned forward and clasped his head in his hands again. "I was never there for her when she was growing up," he mumbled, sounding as if he was on the verge of tears. "I couldn't turn her away now. I owed her." "I understand, Admiral," Anderson said, reaching forward to place a comforting hand on Grissom's shoulder. "But you have to tell me where she went." Grissom looked up at him, his expression naked and vulnerable. "I gave her the name of a freighter captain down at the ports. Ehring, captain of the Gossamer. He helps people who want to disappear. She left last night." "Where was she going?" "I didn't ask. Ehring takes care of all the details. You need to talk to him." "Where is he?" "The Gossamer left this morning on a trade run out near the Terminus systems. He won't be back for weeks." "We don't have weeks, sir." Grissom stood up, his posture a little straighter than it had been when Anderson first arrived, as if his muscles were trying to remember what it was like to stand proudly at attention. "Then I guess you'll just have to get your patrols out there and find him, soldier. He's the only one who can lead you to my daughter." Anderson jumped crisply to his feet. "Don't worry, Admiral. I won't let anything happen to her." He started to salute, but Grissom turned his head away. "Don't," he muttered, ashamed. "I don't deserve that. Not anymore." Anderson extended his hand instead. The older man hesitated a moment, then reached out and clasped it in a surprisingly firm grip. "You're a better man than I ever was, Anderson. The Alliance is lucky to have you." The lieutenant didn't know what to say, so he only nodded. Grissom took him firmly by the elbow and led him out of the living room to the front door. "Remember your promise," he said as his parting words. "Don't let anything happen to my daughter." Grissom watched the lieutenant leaving his home on the vidscreen for the security camera over his front door, only turning away when the young man got into his vehicle and sped off. Then he made his way slowly to the back of the house and knocked once on the closed door of his bedroom. A second later, Kaylee opened it and asked, "Who was it?" "Some Alliance snoop who figured out we were related. I sent him on a wild goose chase. He'll spend the next 2 weeks out near the Terminus systems chasing down an old friend of mine." "Are you sure he bought it?" Kaylee asked. "I gave him exactly what he wanted," Grissom said, with a cynical smile. "The chance to help an old friend. Broken down hero remember something of who he used to be." "But he's not the one we have to worry about," Grissom continued. "Things won't get tough until we run into someone involved in the attack on Sidon." Kaylee reached out and grabbed his hand, pressing it firmly between her own palms. "Thank you," she said, staring up into her father's eyes. "I mean it." He nodded, and shifted uncomfortably until she released her grip. "We'll wait a few more days," he said, turning away and leaving her to the privacy of her room. "Then we'll figure out some way to get you off this planet." A large desk, dark shadow... sorry, not desk. A large, dark shadow crept quickly and quietly across the moonlit grounds of Grissom's estate, making its way toward the home. Scar could move silently when he had to, even in full body armor. It slowed him down, but he usually relied on strength rather than speed anyway. There were no lights on inside the small house of the man Scar now knew to be the father of his target. He'd been surprised when his Batarian information broker had come up with the name of an Alliance hero, but it didn't really change the job. It just meant there'd be more fallout when he was done. The Krogan didn't know if Kaylee Saunders was inside, but even if she wasn't, her father probably knew how to find her. Scar was confident he could make the human talk, as long as he didn't accidentally kill him first. That's why he was traveling light, armed only with a pistol and his favorite knife. He paused outside the only door, listening for signs of life. From his belt, he pulled out his Omni tool, using it to hack in and disable the security system and override the electrical lock. He slid the Omni tool back into his belt, exchanging it for his pistol, and pushed the door open. His eyes still adjusting to the darkness, he put one foot across the threshold. The shotgun blast took him square in the chest. There was a blue flash as the reflective system of kinetic barrier fields reacted to the impact, deflecting most of the rounds harmlessly away. The few tore through the kinetic barriers only to ricochet off the ablative plates of his body armor, or bury themselves into the thick padding underlay. A handful penetrated every layer of protection and tore into the flesh beneath. The force of the blast lifted the Krogan off his feet, knocking the pistol from his grip and hurling him back out the door to land heavily on the ground. Grissom jumped up from the chair where he'd been holding a nightly vigil. Ever since Kaylee had arrived and raised the gun for another shot, he'd recognized the blue flash as the intruder's kinetic barriers that absorbed most of the initial blow, but the point-blank hit would have drained the shields, and one more good shot should finish the job. Laying on his back, Scar yanked the knife from his belt and flung it end over end at his attacker. The blade sank deep into the muscle of Grissom's left bicep as he squeezed the shotgun's trigger again, knocking him back and throwing off his aim. Instead of blowing away the Krogan's head, he left a scorching hole in the ground just beside him. The shotgun's barrel slipped from Grissom's suddenly nerveless hand. Scar was on his feet and back inside the house before the old man could use his one good arm to bring the weapon to bear again. Bellowing in anger, the Krogan slapped the gun away with one massive fist, sending it skittering into the living room. He grabbed the human and flung him against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. The blade slipped from Grissom's arm as he slumped down to the floor, all the air knocked out of his lungs. The alien loomed above him, turning its head slightly so it could fix one of its cold reptilian eyes on him. Grissom was no coward, but he felt fear grip his heart as he stared up into the dead black pupil. Then he heard a loud crack, crack, crack. The familiar retort of an Alliance Hain Kedar P-1525, and the Krogan staggered away. He'd been shot 3 times in the heavy hump of muscle and bone on his back, but he was still standing. Lieutenant Anderson stood in the doorway, pistol drawn. He came into the room, firing the pistol a half-dozen more times as the Krogan turned to face him. He aimed low, looking to take out the legs. One of his shots found the exposed joint at the knee where the hard plates of body armor were connected by a flexible but vulnerable padded mesh. Roaring in rage and agony, the Krogan crashed to the ground, clutching at his wounded joint. "One move, and the next shot goes right between your eyes," Anderson warned, taking a bead on the bony ridge running along the top of the Krogan's skull. Grissom was impressed. It wasn't easy to take a human in full body armor down with a pistol, never mind a Krogan. "I'm glad to see you here." he managed to gasp once the wind returned to his lungs. "You didn't honestly expect me to be fooled by that little performance you gave the other day," Anderson replied, never taking his eyes or his weapon off the Krogan in the corner. "I've been watching this place ever since I walked out of your door." Grissom struggled to his feet, his left arm still dangling uselessly, his right pressed against his heavily bleeding wound. A moan of pain escaped his lips. "Your friend is hurt," the Krogan growled. Anderson wasn't distracted, even for an instant. "He's tough. He'll live." The Krogan was bleeding from the shot to his knee. The armor on his chest was peppered with small holes, the padding beneath scorched and burned. Dark blood oozed from 3 of them. Anderson guessed at least one of these shots to the back had penetrated deep enough to do some damage as well. But he'd seen Krogans take a hell of a lot more punishment than this and keep coming. The alien on the ground was a wounded beast, angry, desperate, and unpredictable. He was panting, though whether from pain, exertion, or pure rage, it was hard to say. His scarred, brutish face was a mask of intense concentration. His muscles were tensed as if he was gathering himself to make a move. But if he tried anything, Anderson would shoot him in the head from inside of 3 meters. Even a Krogan couldn't survive that. He heard a door open and footsteps come running down the hall. "Oh God, you're hurt!" a woman screamed. Anderson wasn't stupid enough to turn his head, but for a split second his eyes glanced in the direction of her voice. That was all the time the Krogan needed. He lashed out with a fist, sending a shock wave of rolling energy rumbling across the room. Anderson had never been hit with a biotic attack before, and he hadn't expected one from a Krogan. In the split second it took him to realize what was happening, he'd been swept up in the vortex and thrown all the way into the living room, where he crashed to the ground. It felt like being in an artificial gravity chamber when somebody switched the polarity, an instantaneous, inescapable, and irresistible force. He couldn't recover in time to grab his pistol from where it had fallen, nor could he reach the shotgun laying only a few feet away. Somehow, the Krogan, despite his injuries, was already back on his feet and nearly on top of him, swinging his fist with enough power to cave in Anderson's skull. He ducked and slipped to the side, avoiding the punch. The follow-through landed square on the living room table. It disintegrated into splinters at the impact. Everything had descended into chaos. Grissom was shouting at Kaylee to run. She was screaming at Anderson to grab one of the guns. The Krogan was roaring in anger, flailing about the room, flinging and tossing the furniture like it was made of balsa wood, while Anderson dodged and scrambled for his life, only able to avoid the killing blows because his opponent was still hobbled by his wounded knee. From the corner of his eye, he saw Kaylee rush forward into the fray, lunging in a desperate bid to get the shotgun. The Krogan saw her too, and wheeled on the young woman. He would have killed her right then if another bullet hadn't ripped through a seam in his armor at his hip, making him stagger off balance and misdirecting his blow. Anderson whipped his head around to see a Turian standing in the door where he had been mere minutes before, firing a pistol at the Krogan. The lieutenant had no idea who he was or why he was here. He was just glad they had somebody else on their side. Most of the shots ricocheted off the Krogan's armor as the beast ducked down and tried to cover his head, the only exposed part of his body. He glanced back at the Turian, then leaped through the living room window, smashing through the plate glass. The Krogan landed on his shoulder on the grass outside and rolled to his feet in one smooth motion. He took off in a lumbering run, his gait awkward because of his injured leg, but moving far faster than Anderson would have believed possible for a creature of his size. The Turian stepped outside and fired a few shots into the darkness, then turned and came back into the house. "Aren't you going after him?" Grissom asked their unknown ally. He was still sitting on the floor, but he'd used the belt of his bathrobe to tie a tourniquet around the upper arm, stemming the flow of blood from the wounded bicep. "Not armed only with this," the Turian responded, holding up his pistol. "Besides, only a fool faces a Krogan biotic alone." "I think what Admiral Grissom actually meant to say," Anderson said, coming over and extending his hand, "was thank you for saving us." The Turian stared down at the offered hand, but made no effort to extend his own. Embarrassed, the lieutenant pulled his hand back. "I know why he's here," Grissom said, through teeth gritted against the pain, nodding his head in Anderson's direction. "What's your story?" "I've been tailing Scar for 2 days," the Turian said, waiting for him to make a move. "Tailing him?" Kaylee asked as she came over to check on her father's wound. "What for? Who are you?" "My name is Saren. I'm a Spectre, and I want some answers." It's the end of Chapter 11. We'll see you guys next week with Chapter 12.